Hello and welcome to this how-to video from eWard-Winning Outdoors at ewardwinning94.wordpress.com. I did a video just a little bit ago on how to solder plumbing, and the next one I want to do is how to solder electrical connections. That's something, again, that some people find this kind of intimidating, but soldering is really a pretty simple skill. For this demo today, I have a little light here that I want to connect this red wire to the white wire on this light. This is a simulation. It's actually of no value. I'm just doing it for the demonstration purposes. This is a scrap light out of my workbench. But to do this, you need your soldering iron. And one hint on your soldering iron to start with is give it plenty of time to get warm. There's nothing more frustrating than getting in a hurry and your soldering iron isn't hot enough to do the job. Then we want a little bit of soldering flux. And what this is a thinner that helps the solder to flow together better. And it is well worth taking a moment and it's a very minor expense to get some soldering flux. And then for wiring, we typically want rosin core solder. So it's a kind of solder that's designed for small electrical work. It's not the same stuff you'd use for plumbing, but it works very well for electrical. So I'm going to just stick the tip of my wiring and get a little bit of flux on it. And then the next step is what we call tinning. And I assume that name comes because originally solder was made largely of tin. Original solder was usually lead and tin. Anymore, because of toxicity issues, most of it doesn't include lead. But you can tin the tip of your soldering iron, just touch that solder to it. And then also the wires themselves, before you try to make a connection, heat them up with your soldering iron. And in this case, I've got just a little bit of solder on the iron, and it's actually, I don't know how well it'll show in the video, but it's actually coating that exposed wire tip with a little bit of solder. And then this other wire that I have here, I'll do the same thing. I'll just touch my soldering iron to that extra solder there, and I'm going to try to move close enough that hopefully you can see a little better here. But as I touch that, you can see that that copper wire turns silver, and that is now tinned. Both of those sections have, or both of those pieces of wire connection have solder on them, so I probably will not need any more solder for this project. One mistake that's commonly made when you're trying to solder stuff, you don't want to melt the solder onto the wiring. You're not using your torch or your soldering iron to melt the solder. What you're doing is you're heating the wire up with your soldering iron and then letting that wire and the heat from the wire itself be what melts that solder together. That gives you a much better connection than if you're trying to just melt that solder. So I'm just touching these together. They're already tinned, so they already have solder on them, and that melts the solder there. And the hardest part here is holding them still long enough to make that connection and then let that solder cool. And I'm doing a poor job of holding it still while it cools in place. The solder is working perfectly. I am not. Okay, that worked. I was able to hold still long enough, trying to hold too many things at once, but that wire is now soldered together. You could put some heat shrink tubing or something over it and you've got a really good electrical connection. You could do the same thing if it was a little tab or another type of connection on that, but that's really all there is to it. You can also unsolder. I've got these soldered together, but if for some reason I wanted them apart, I can just touch the soldering iron to them until they heat up enough to come apart. Makes a great connection. It's a better electrical connection than crimp connectors and stuff like that. So if you want a really serious electrical connection, solder's the way to go. Just heat that up until that solder melts and flows together. Hold steady long enough that that solder can cool a little bit, and you'll have your connection. So that's all there is to it. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Click the like button and the subscribe button down below if you'd like to see more videos like this, and that helps me out as well. I appreciate you watching and hope you can get some good out of this and see some more in the future.